This is Growing Up Aspen, a Joiner's Table podcast with Chris Pomeroy and Andy Collin. And our guest today is Valery, as I know her, Valery Moore Kelly. And as a kid growing up, she was involved in my early years. So let's dive into what's your story and how your family got to Aspen in the Valley.
Okay. So my folks met and were married on Long Island, and I think 1947 they were married, and they moved out west. The first time they came to Aspen, my oldest sister was born, and she got left back east, and my mom and my dad and his brother got in a car and drove out west, and they were planning to go to Sun Valley. So they got to Denver. I think they got up to Idaho Springs, and they were staying in a lodge and talking to some people, and someone said, asked them where they were going. And my mom was all excited to see Sun Valley and the movie stars and, read about it in the magazines. And then someone said, well, Aspen's on your way and you should really check it out. It's just, just a little diversion off your route. So they came up to Aspen. I think it was 1952 because the FIS had just been the year before. And my mom just said it was so idyllic and gorgeous. The snow was fantastic. She didn't know how to ski. My dad and my uncle did. So she went to ski school and they stayed with Charlie Patterson. Uh-huh. And of course, it was like full room and board for $2.50 for the day. And, ski school was, like $1.75, or I'm making it up. But and it was just this magical time, and the snowfall and how beautiful it was. And so they just fell in love with the idea of Aspen, of the place. And pretty soon thereafter, they moved out west. And they settled in Golden because my dad's father was actually in a dry cleaning business. And so they started there, and then they made their way up to Aspen. I think they arrived in 55. Mm-hmm. And they bought an old miner's cabin on the West End on West Francis. And they lived there and had, actually my sister Pam was born in Denver. I think maybe Susie was too. And then we had some tragedies in the family. Both my sister Susie, who was between the eldest Linda and Pam, died tragically of leukemia. And then my brother Noel, who was a baby, Susie was about, I want to say she was 6 or 7, I think, when she died. And then Noel was a baby. He died when he was 6 months.
Wow.
So that was just a really
tough on the
terrible
family.
Time. Yeah. That was a really terrible, painful time for my parents, of course. And it's always continues to play a part in our lives to this day, that kind of loss.
Yeah.
My dad ended up building the Tipple Inn, which was a tipple.
Remember that.
At the base of Aspen Mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like right at the base where Little Nell is. And it was an old mining contraption building that the miners would put the ore in at the top, and it would filter down through and break off. And then, you'd find chunks of silver would come out the bottom. That's my rudimentary understanding of it.
Yeah.
And so he took that structure, and it was called Aspen's first skyscraper because it was a 3-story building, and he converted and made apartments.
Wow. And
they put them out, and that was the Tipple Inn. And Mom's their motto was Tipple in and topple over. So my parents were in the lodging business, and I'm not really sure what years those were, but in about 65 or 66, they were good friends with Army and Sarah Armstrong. And Army and Mom were up late one night, maybe some drinking had been happening, and he's like, I'm going to buy this place. And she did the book. She knew exactly how much they had in it. Yeah. And so he's like, how much would you take for it? And she named a price, and he's like, done. And so suddenly they sold the business, and then they moved out to McLean Flats, where they bought land from, it was the original homestead on McLean Flats before anything else.
Wow.
Early days. It was owned by Mary Harriton. She's married to Skip Harriton here. They live on Thomas Road. They're my neighbors here in Carbondale. And it was her grandfather's place. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but So it was a original farmhouse that my dad moved down to a lower part of the property, and then he built a big stone house up there on McLean Flats, and it was it was probably one of the first McMansions from what other people saw. It was about, wasn't a modest place. It was pretty big and grand, but it was a wonderful, wonderful house, and I'm sure lots of people went there because my parents were big entertainers, and there was always parties, and we had, we always had a harvest party in the fall, like in September. My mom was an incredible veggie gardener, so we would always have vegetables and fruit and, raspberries, and eat from the garden all summer long. And my parents were big river runners in the early days. My dad bought an old Army surplus raft, 8-man raft, and they rafted Glen Canyon before it was dammed. And they rafted the Grand, and they rafted all kinds of rivers in the early days. And so my dad was, he was really kind of a pioneer of a lot of things, I think. In Aspen, he was like the first man to wear shorts. Like back in the days when men did not wear shorts, And he was a big runner, and he would just run everywhere. In fact, he liked to run downhill the best. So he would catch a ride up Aspen Mountain, and then he would run down. Wow. And unfortunately, I think that completely, scorched his joints. He was, he had later in his life, he suffered a lot from physical, joints were worn out by all his running. And so mom and dad were, daddy, of course, KNCB Moore, Alphabet Moore was some people called him, and he wrote letters to the editor, which many people remember. He signed them, "Be Brave, Comrades." And
I do remember those, yeah.
He was kind of a political gadfly who had lots of opinions, and you could never tell which side of the political spectrum he was on. And he was just an intellectual giant, and also sometimes very hard to understand and follow. And we had this beautiful rambling 16-acre property, and he built a lot of rental housing in Aspen. He had various rental properties around town, up in Snowmass Village. In fact, that's another good story. When Snowmass ski area was starting out, they had a contest to name ski runs, and the prize for the contest, if you won, was a lot on McSkimmings Road, I think. And so mom submitted names for the contest, which were names of river rapids. So one was Velvet Falls, which everyone knows is there at the base of Snowmass, and Moonshine. Yeah. And I think she named one Snaggletooth also, but I'm not sure that name stuck. I think Snowmass went to think that later. And so then my dad built a little house on that property in Snowmass. And, he really wanted to provide housing, and he was very interested in politics. He ran for sheriff once. He did not win. He ran for town council, and I think maybe he was on town council for a short period, but he kind of wanted to be in politics, but it never seemed to really work out. He was, mom was very big part of Anderson Ranch Art Center at the beginning. She kind of came up with the, with other board members, came up with the art auction. And so she used to run that, and she did a lot of the benefits. She was the party giver, and she was a great artist and photographer, and took, many workshops with all kinds of great photographers who came through the ranch. And so she was kind of a founding board member there. That's.
Thanks for listening. The authors of Growing Up Aspen would like to thank you, and would like to also thank the Aspen Times and the Aspen Daily News for giving us materials for our book, Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised, which you can get at twistandturnpress.com and any local bookstore. Thanks.